Can you hear me okay? Oh, you can definitely hear me okay. Right? Well, it's nice to be here. I certainly took away a couple of key words from that presentation. Rapid and radical. I will try not to be rapid or radical. But we will talk about the social costs of and benefits of all this deregulation stuff. The other thing I sort of liked about that video was the fairly powerful linkage between protection of small customers, low-income consumers, and the environment, as well as obviously job protection and the like. And that's a strong combination. So let me actually ask you sort of I don't really know like who's here. Right? So just give me your show of hands. How many people are sort of union employees of utilities or like related kind of activities? Most of you. How many are sort of management people at utilities? Commission, PUC, regulatory kind of folks? Okay. Legislative kind of folks? And who did I leave out? That's it. Well, good. Customers. How many are just regular old? Are there any regular old customers out here? With no regular old customers. I assume you're all customers. You're all taxpayers, hopefully. You're all customers. You're all voters. Voters, you got to be voters. How many are shareholders? So shareholders in utilities in Michigan. Employee stock option plans did wonders for all of this stuff. Well, good. I'm happy to be here. I'll have to admit up front that it's not very often that I speak to a crowd that's mostly utility employees, union employees. I speak reasonably often to management folks at utilities and almost daily to utility regulators and their staffs, frequently to state legislators, and hardly ever to the people who really sort of like make it all happen. So I'm happy to be here, and feel free to like stop me as I go along if you feel like I'm speaking a foreign language or anything like that. I'll give you a. Is this going to work okay? It's not too bad. A quick overview of the kinds of things that I'll end up talking about. You all have the slides in front of you. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the sort of environmental implications of all this. I like that phrase. What was it? Rapid and radical restructuring. Actually, if I were to edit that film, I'd probably drop the rapid and radical, because I don't really think that the speed or the extent of change is nearly as important as like things like haphazard, ill-advised, poorly thought out, things like that. So I don't care if deregulation comes sort of rapidly or for that matter if it's relatively radical, as long as it doesn't produce adverse consequences to the kinds of things you all care about and the kinds of things I saw that were listed that were described in the video. And some of those things, of course, are the environment. So I'm going to talk about the impact on the environment. I'm going to talk about the impact on both existing and new kind of resources, what kind of power plants we'll be using in the future, and why does deregulation sort of matter for all of that. Now, in a lot of these areas, it's going to be the particular aspects of deregulation, because, again, in keeping with this notion that it's not really radical or rapid that matters, it's whether you do it right or wrong. Right, there are a lot of ways to do this deregulation stuff wrong. Michigan's got a good start on that. There are not as many ways to do it right, and I'm happy to say that a lot of places are doing it reasonably well in this country, and a few more places are doing it reasonably well overseas. So it's not like there aren't reasonable, rational, well thought out, protective ways of going about it. And the question and the challenge really for all of you in Michigan is how good of a job Michigan will be doing all this stuff. What will happen to renewables and energy efficiency, and what impact, if any, we can expect from informed customer choice. On the customer side, I have it up here as cost, but it's really the sort of customer side of all of this. I'm going to talk some about the risks. Who bears what risk, and how large are the risks? How are the risks different than what we're used to from the old regulated kind of monopoly world? What will prices look like? How will price volatility in the future be different than what we've grown up with in the past? And then as well, some of the low-income, residential, small consumer kinds of concerns. So hopefully, when we're all done with that, we would have covered a lot of the social costs and benefits, and I wouldn't have kept you, separated you from the social hour in the free bar for any longer than I absolutely have to. In fact, I can stop right here. Here, we're just about done with these conclusions. This is just in case any of you want to start at the free bar before the allotted time here is over. My conclusions are real simple. There are a lot of serious risks. There really are a lot of ways to do this wrong, and we have examples of people who are doing it wrong, and the cause for concern. You are well-founded in your fear. Right? This is not irrational fear. It is not the things that I sort of saw in the video. And does the video sort of reasonably capture how you folks feel? Yeah? Okay, well, those kinds of fears and concerns, I think, are legitimate and well-founded. Now, some of them, I think, can be more easily protected against than others. And we'll sort of talk about some of the things that can be done. But let me also say that I think the alternative of not moving forward with restructuring, and I actually think more rapidly, not less, may be worse. Because even like the Pacific Gas and Electric example that we saw in the video, right? That was 2 years before the commission in California first said we're going to do anything about restructuring. All right, what we see all across the country is the risk of restructuring, the uncertainty associated with restructuring, the unknowns, the fact that that Detroit Edison, even though restructuring is not going to come this year, they're preparing for it, whether it comes next year or the year after that or the year after that. The risk of restructuring itself produces almost all of the adverse consequences that you fear will come from restructuring itself. And yet we're not sort of taking the corrective steps in the meantime. The kinds of things we saw in that example of Pacific Gas and Electric, letting 5,000 people go, finding out only too late that it was too many people that they let go. Well, that's happening everywhere, and it's happening everywhere across the country before rapid and radical restructuring. I told some folks this morning about the sort of a follow-up from that, not the same storm from Pacific Gas and Electric, but they just lost a large lawsuit because they also cut back on their tree trimming expenses, and that resulted in some fires near some of their facilities, and that resulted in a fairly large damage award by a court recently against Pacific Gas and Electric. But as you march across the country, I don't care if it's the Southeast, the West, the Northeast, the Midwest, Texas, all you have to do is read the trade press and see the number of places and instances where utilities are cutting back, contracting out, doing whatever types of things that we saw in the video. Those are all happening. Cutting back on environmental protection. It's happening. It's happening here in Michigan. Cutting back on energy efficiency, energy conservation programs. That's gone in Michigan, right? All of the really fairly successful conservation programs were being run by Consumers Power. They're now gone, and that's before deregulation. That's before, actually probably before there was much discussion about it at all. It's simply the risk of competition, the risk of restructuring. So one of my conclusions here is, the types of things that you care about, the social costs of restructuring, you could also title it the social costs that we're living with today. The social costs of being in a society that places a very high value on the free market system being applied to everything that we can possibly apply it to. And that's the sort of trend that we're in now. That's the sort of political and economic environment that we're all living in, and that's not going to go away. If your goal was to defeat some deregulation bill at the legislature, and phew, you made it through another legislative session and you won't have to come back for 3 more months, you wouldn't have solved a single one of your problems, right? Because every one of the problems that were in that video are going to go on the day after, are going to continue the day after that bill was defeated. You know, what you really need to do is work on those pieces of legislation and those pieces of policy and those pieces of regulatory reform that put in place the protection for the things you care about now. Job security, worker safety, environment, low income protection. Beef those things up now, get them in place now, and then don't change them when you move to deregulation. Because you're sort of losing the war while you're fighting the battles. And a lot of the war here in this situation has already been lost. Now, if you do it well, you know, restructuring can have positive effects overall for the economy, overall for the state of Michigan, overall for the environment, for low-income consumers and others. You know, that's a big if, though, right? If done well. Right? So your task, and I really applaud you for being here today and spending the whole day really sort of going over this, is trying to figure out the differences between good and bad, right? What do we do to make something good? How do we do it well? What are the options? What are the experiences in other places? So that's now, having finished my talk, we can all go have a beer and talk about other things. I would talk about the thing that I like to talk about more than just about anything, and that's the Chicago Bulls victory. But I won't. No, I'm up here. I've got the microphone. That doesn't mean I'll stop. All right, let's talk. I'm going to then talk about the sort of changing economic foundation of all of this, right? You've got to always start with the foundation and see how all of this stuff really matters. Now, I've got this listed as wholesale and retail, and I really probably should retitle that. It really should be sort of regulation and retail competition, or old world, new world, something like that. Right? You know the old world. Right? The old world's the top part. It's called wholesale here. I must have borrowed this slide from a different talk. And that's very straightforward. Utility has the obligation to serve, and that has all sorts of obligations and baggage and responsibilities with it. It certainly meant they had the obligation to plan, buy, or build in order to meet all reasonable customer needs, and they had to do it, of course, on a cost kind of basis, slightly a cost plus kind of basis. The important thing was the customers had the obligation to pay. Right? They were all captive customers. We're all familiar with the old world. What's the new world? The new world with this radical, now it's not radical deregulation. Full customer choice, full retail access, full retail competition, looks sort of like the telephone business, where the utility, or all that remains of the utility, is the wires business. Right? They have the obligation not to serve, but to connect. Very basic difference in the obligation that they have. They're going to connect you, but they don't have any obligation to provide a single kilowatt or kilowatt hour to turn your refrigerator or turn your TV on. That's going to be somebody else's obligation. It's going to be the obligation of whomever ultimately secures that customer. What's the customer's responsibility? The customer's responsibility is to pay whatever they agree to. Right? It's all a contract kind of world. I will pay you, I, the customer, will agree with my supplier to pay whatever it is we mutually agree to. That's a very different kind of world. It produces a very different kind of financial environment for planning, for building, for maintaining. It produces the underlying pressure that all of the utilities are operating under, because they've got no guarantee. They will have no guarantee anymore that they will have customers at all, or those customers will continue paying what they have in the past. Right? A huge financial risk. Now, let's think about it first in the context of resources. Now, resources is just a fancy word that regulator types use for power plants of one sort or another. So what kind of new power plants, and what will the future of existing power plants be under this kind of world? Well, it's a world in which the financial underpinnings of those assets are the contracts with customers, or contracts with utilities, distribution companies, that are backed up by contracts with customers, or sales to a spot market of some sort or another. Now, the one thing that all of those things have in common, those three options of the financial underpinnings of all of this stuff, they're all short term. Nobody expects that customers in a deregulated electricity market will sign long-term contracts. Now, I know that large industrial customers are signing long-term contracts here, these sort of special contracts with utilities now, but that's not a deregulated world. Right? When you actually get to a deregulated world, if you were like the United Kingdom, if you were like Argentina, if you were like New Zealand, if you were like parts of Australia, you would have no customers signing contracts of any substantial duration. You know, in the United Kingdom, a long-term contract, 3 years. You know, there may be a few customers who have signed 5-year contracts. The majority of customers are on like 1-year contracts or month to month. All right, this is all short-term kind of stuff. Contrast that with the old world. The old world, there wasn't perhaps a written contract, but since you had the obligation to serve, it was the tantamount to a long-term contract, 20 years, life of the customer contract, life of the plant kind of contract. That provided the financial underpinnings that you'd go out and build a plant and and decide whether or not you're ever going to get your money back. Well, what are you going to build? Or what are you going to repair? Or what are you going to do with your existing plants? If your entire output of that facility is, or all of those facilities, is committed for 1 or 2 or maybe 3 years. My guess is the average is going to be somewhere around a year, maybe 2. There won't be much under 3-year contracts. Now, think about what you'd start doing. You know, the choices that you make with those kinds of time frames are really very different than what we've seen historically. The planning horizon, the sort of payback period, everything sort of collapses. Now, how this sounds pretty radical, right? This is probably one of those rapid and radical kinds of changes in the industry, going from an industry that was built on life of the customer or life of the unit kind of contracts to something that's essentially the spot market, no long-term contracts. Sounds pretty radical. Why would anybody ever build a power plant under that new kind of regime? Well, it is a different kind of regime, but some of the things you got to keep in mind is the rest of the economy sort of works that way. You know, it would take other sort of capital-intensive kind of businesses. Being here in Lansing and Michigan, I can think of one, right? Cars. I don't know anybody out there that signs long-term contracts for the supply of cars or trucks. And yet, we still see General Motors occasionally building new assembly plants, putting a few $100 million down and building plants on the hopes and expectations that they're going to sell enough of the output from that plant to justify the building of that plant. Steel. Nobody buys steel on long-term contracts, and yet people build steel mills. Cement. Nobody buys cement, long-term contracts. Oil. Nobody buys oil on long-term contracts. Everybody's in effect is really in the spot market for all of those commodities, and yet capital gets expended. Well, what's different about the electric utility industry versus all of those other businesses? I'll tell you one very important difference that will have a major impact on the sort of what gets built kind of stuff. If you want to be in the car business, right, if that's the business you've selected that you're going to be in and you want to be a player in the car business, you've got to build an assembly plant. And the difference between assembly plant A and assembly plant B and assembly plant C are minuscule. You know, you basically don't have any choices except to build or not to build. You know, the sort of top-of-the-line assembly plant versus your sort of cheap assembly plant, they're not that different. Refineries, same thing. If you're going to be in the oil business, you're going to build refineries. And you don't have the choice of not building a refinery, you're not going to be in a business. What's different about electricity is you've got a whole lot of choices. Right? You can build things that are very expensive, capital capital intensive, things like nuclear power plants, things like large coal-fired plants, things like hydroelectric facilities, things that have a lot of capital, a lot of steel, cement, and the like, and really no or very relatively low operating cost. Or at the other end, you can buy Honda generators or small gas turbines, things that are relatively cheap to buy. You can buy them off the shelf and start producing electricity tomorrow. A relatively low capital cost, but relatively high operating cost. The range of options to get into this business and to sort of continue in this business is really pretty wide. And what all of that really means for new kinds of resources is that there won't be, there will probably not be, there will probably not be much investment in large capital-intensive plants. And you see that already every place around the world where deregulation has occurred. It's not that plants won't get built. It's that the things that will get built will be smaller, cheaper, probably less labor intensive. I'm not really sure. A lot of gas-fired combined cycle facilities, you'll see. Right, so the United Kingdom has a lot of gas-fired combined cycle facilities going in and really about nothing else. How many people work at a nuclear power plant? There won't be any more. I can guarantee you in a deregulated world in this country or just about any other. There won't be any more, and probably a quarter of the existing plants will shut down within a year or two of deregulation, and the rest won't go that much longer after that. Oh, well then you can continue working. Yeah, sure, you'll be okay. But there is an impact at existing power plants as well. I mean, existing and even non-nuclear. Because the same phenomena that you saw with Pacific Gas and Electric is sort of cutting back on expenses, to reducing tree trimming and sort of cutting back on maintenance of transmission distribution kind of systems. That's the same underlying financial pressure is there everywhere, right? So it's there at the power plant level too. So you're going to see much less or a much greater emphasis on efforts to minimize capital additions, capital investments in power plants. And that will mean that the plants that would have been sort of more marginal, things that would require sort of some major kind of investments, will be much less likely to be made. You're going to see that same deferred, the attitude of deferring maintenance, deferring improvements will appear every place. The fix and run, a small fix and run, right? Just plug holes and keep it going will be. You can certainly expect that kind of attitude and that kind of sort of operations to continue. Now, who was here in the morning session where I spoke this morning? Some of you, I know some of you were there. I had made some reference there to. So no one here works at Fermi, right? You represent Fermi. Well, I had that little discussion this morning about Fermi and my understanding of the commission. Uh-oh.
I've taken notes. Let's hear what you had to say.
Okay. I read the commission's order, the June 5th order. I assume everybody's read the commission's order on this stuff already. So I reread the commission's order again just because when I read it the first time, I bent the page and put a big mark next to it, and I said, there was something wrong here. But let me just read one sentence to you. And actually, Harry, you still back there? Listen, catch just one line here, and you tell me if I'm missing something here. And this is treatment of stranded costs for nuclear plants, which I assume includes Fermi. Given the need to ensure adequate financial resources for nuclear plants, the entire net capital cost of facilities should be included as stranded costs. Here's the important part. Because it is unlikely that the market value of the energy produced will be able to offset the operating and maintenance costs for some time to come. Right? It's unlikely that the market price, the value of the electricity that comes out of the plant, will be able to offset the operating and maintenance costs. Now, if that's true, then at least the real operational people at Fermi should start looking for jobs shortly. Now, if you're one of the security people who will have to guard it for the next 50 years, you've got no problem. Well, the makeup of employees may change after a while, but I mean that sounds, Harry, to me like they've got something wrong here. You know, that we're gonna give somebody more money and stranded costs, because if we didn't, the market value of power won't cover the operating and maintenance costs. Yeah, Harry, tell me what I.
It's Commission's order
It's
review 11290.
It's the Commission's order. It actually is. It seems to be quoting the staff's report, which in that part of that it endorses.
They talk about produce used and useful and so forth, but I think they're giving lip service. I don't think they
This is it certainly suggests that there's going to be there's something wrong. I don't know anything about Fermi, but if that Commission order is accurate when it talks about nuclear plants not being able to cover their operating and maintenance costs.
It doesn't seem to fit, because typically the capital investment of the plant that is high and the operating costs are generally low.
Yeah, that's typically the case. The problem is, of course, we now in the last 3 months have 4 nuclear plants that have shut down for exactly that reason, that the operating and maintenance costs exceed the market value of power. And so I can understand it occurring.
They had to do some upgrades, and that they decided to not make those investments as opposed to operating costs.
Actually, that's true for some and not true for others.
The two that were shut down permanently.
The 2 at Fermi?
No, the two that you're talking about, Yankee and Connecticut.
Yankee actually had very minor continued maintenance costs to get back online, $40 million, which in that field is pretty small. They really concluded it wasn't worth spending $40 million to.
It wasn't to get it back online, it was that they were going to be reaching their expected life, and they would then have to make the more intensive capital investment. We decided to shut it down earlier rather than spend those $40 million and not recoup it within that short period of time.
Well, at least let's put it this way. 2 years ago, they spent $40 million resleeving tubes, and they thought at that point that they recovered that $40 million with 6 months of plant operation. This time, they concluded that the extra $40 million to bring it back in service no longer was worth it. And it does not bode well. But in any event, that's something to tell you just simply about the impact on existing plants and what, sort of how the financial underpinnings of some of this stuff may actually end up working. Let me also tell you something about the sort of change in risks in all of this that you sort of see in all of this industry. This is a hypothetical that's actually modeled on a real life example, but I give you this our little sort of illustration up there to make a point. All right, what I've got up there is a hypothetical case where a utility or an investor in a deregulated kind of market is trying to pick between 2 plants. They're going to build a power plant. Which one is it going to be? And they're either going to build the power plant on the left, which is a gas-fired combined cycle standard kind of power plant that everybody's building, or they're going to build I've got my example here as a wind facility. Could be a hydro facility or something of that nature. And what I give you in my little graphical hypothetical is the green line is my expected cost. Right? We all sort of have this our best guess at what these plants are going to cost us. So I think that the gas-fired facility here is going to cost me $0.05 a kilowatt hour. That's my best guess. Now, around that guess, I've got some range of uncertainty. Right? It might cost as much as 6 cents. It might cost as little as 4 cents. Now, what moves me around in that range of uncertainty, this is a gas plant, is mostly the cost of gas. And I don't really know how much natural gas is going to cost. So I've got to really put a bracket around that 5 cents. If my forecast for natural gas is right, then the plant will cost a nickel a kilowatt hour. Then I've got my wind facility, could be a hydro facility, and lo and behold, you can't maybe tell up there, but that's coming in at 4.9 cents. It's a little bit cheaper, right? That's my best guess. And I've got my range of uncertainty around it. And here now my range of uncertainty is really, well, you know, how good is the wind going to be? You know, some years it's good, some years it's not so good, and my testing wasn't so good. Or if it's hydro, what's going to happen as stream flows, as climate change sort of really hits the Michigan area, turning it into a desert kind of area, and my hydro production falls. So I've got some uncertainty around that one too, but it's not something like natural gas prices. Well, so now the question is, these are my choices. What do I pick? Well, in the old world, it was a very straightforward kind of calculation. First thing, most important thing you look at is which one's cheaper. Well, 4.9 is cheaper than 5, pretty straightforward. Well, even in the old world, you took some risk into account. Well, how certain are we about this 4.9 and 5? Well, good news up here is, well, not only the wind or hydro facility is cheaper, it's also more certain. You know, I've got less uncertainty about how much it's actually going to cost. So this is a slam dunk. Like Michael Jordan could have done this. He would have taken the wind plant. You know, it's really pretty straightforward. The calculation and all of that really gets a little bit more complicated, but he would have taken it. Well, what about the brave new world? What about a retail competitive world? What do you do now? Well, believe it or not, a retail competitive model would cause developers to build, or utilities, whoever they happen to be, to build that gas-fired facility. Right? It costs more. Its actual cost is going to be more uncertain, but from an investor's perspective, there's much less risk. Now, why is there much less risk? Right? From an investor's perspective, their ability to sort of recover their costs from this plant, there are no long-term contracts anymore. Their ability to recover the cost for this plant is going to hinge entirely on short-term prices, spot prices, 1-2 year kind of contracts. It's going to hinge on what happens to market prices. Well, what happens if gas prices fall? Right? Everybody knows gas prices might fall. They might go up. We don't really know. Well, what happens if gas prices fall? Well, if gas prices fall, the cost of that power is going to be down around 4.5 cents. What happens to the market price of power when gas prices fall? Well, here's an interesting phenomenon that we'll come back to a little bit later. And that's that in a market, the market price of power is dictated by the sort of plants that are operating on the margin. The fact that you have a nuclear plant running or a hydro plant running, none of that matters. The market price right now, the market price 7:15 on Monday evening is going to be whatever it sort of costs for the most expensive plant that's running right now, the plants that are running on the margin. And pretty much around the country, natural gas is what's dictating market prices. If it isn't already, it will be soon. Right? Natural gas is going to be at that level in the mix that it's going to be on the margin almost all the time. All right, so what happens when natural gas prices fall? The answer is market prices fall. Market prices will go down. What happens when market prices fall and you, as a smart investor, perhaps, bought that wind facility? The answer is you look real stupid. Right? The answer is your cost didn't go down. You're a wind facility. When gas prices fall, your costs go down. And what happens if you're a gas-fired facility and gas prices fall? Your costs go down. Right? So gas prices fall, the gas-fired facility is fine. They're not hurt. They're not losing anything. Their costs went down, their price went down, but the fact that both went down together means that they've come out whole. This guy is now broke, or this guy now has stranded cost. And that's why the sort of the market is moving to a deregulated world moves you over to this kind of proposition. It really means low capital cost, relatively high fuel cost, which today actually just means natural gas, might mean some oil. These are the winners and the losers. Now I also could include in there a couple of other winners, right, that I didn't put down. Small, right? Small things look good, right? Because you're not committing a lot of capital. You're minimizing your amount of risk. Movable things look good. You know, if you get really down there, that's small. Now, I understand Detroit Edison just bought a major share of some fuel cell company. Yeah, which one? Plug? Never heard of them. What's the technology? Okay. It's a fuel cell, but okay. In any event, the important thing here is they're small, and not only they're so small that they're movable. You know, you actually, and Detroit Edison sort of starts putting those things out, and something happens, you know, like they lost some customers, they just pick the thing up and move it. You know, they can move it to Georgia, and maybe serve a customer down there. You know, maybe not a bad move for Detroit Edison. I should actually say one of the things utilities like about fuel cells, very low maintenance. They come on trucks, you plop them down, you connect them in an hour, and you come back 3,000 hours later and look to see how they're doing. Right? So shifting to fuel cells, for those of you that sort of are in the power plant kind of business, there ain't no labor in fuel cells. The only labor in fuel cells is building them. And that, you know, they're going to do someplace else. But that's not a bad technology. Not a bad technology for the new world. Commonwealth Edison, my old boss, I used to work for Commonwealth Edison. They just entered into an agreement with Allied Signal to have exclusive rights to market and distribute a small gas-fired turbine set in a 10-state region in the Midwest, which I assume has to include Michigan. Right, their units range in size from 35 to 75 kilowatts. They look sort of like a chest freezer. They come all packaged together. You know, somebody just plops them. Sears will probably be delivering them. Plop them down. All you do is you plug the cord in, the electric cord in one side, and the gas line in the other, and you've got your combustion turbine, right, and your exhaust someplace, I suppose, but you've got your combustion turbine right there, sized specifically for things like McDonald's restaurants. Right? New technology. They've, for all of you engineers out there, right, they've replaced the oil lubricated bearings with the new technology. They're air floated technology, so that you don't have to maintain them. Right? So you plop it in and you go away and you come back 3,000 hours later and see how it's doing. You know, those kinds of technologies are going to do okay. It's the what we used to call baseload technologies don't do very well. Energy efficiency won't do very well. I'll come back to that one in a while. Renewables won't do very well for the kind of reason I had in my little wind facility up there. They have no fuel cost. Right? They're almost all of the renewables are high capital cost, low fuel cost kind of operations. Some of them are fairly labor intensive. You don't have, I know, very much here yet in the way of wind, but wind actually has, you know, about a 1.5 to 2 cent variable operating cost, which is almost all labor. Right? The people per megawatt for wind is probably substantially better than Detroit Edison and Consumer Power's existing power plants. It's a good sort of. You have to not be afraid of heights, though. But it's a reasonably good technology for labor, but it's not for investors. That's a little bit on the sort of winners and losers. Now, risk. And who sort of bears what kind of risk? Because this is one of the real driving forces behind all this deregulation stuff. Right? To change the risk profile, a lot of people sort of want to change the risk so they don't have to sort of be saddled in the future with the next round of mistakes. Like let's go ahead and deal with current stranded costs, but this better not happen again. Kind of thinking. We're gonna solve this problem once and for all. So this little table tells you something about who bears what risks in the past and the future. Load forecast. Right, just how much are we going to sell? Well, in the past, consumers bore that risk. And obviously, this is consumers with a small c. Customers bore this risk. Now, how did that sort of play out? Well, what it means is if sales went down, right, if sales dropped, utility would sooner or later, usually sooner, come in for a rate case and ask for higher prices to make up the revenue losses. And that's the way the regulatory system worked. Now, the rest of the market doesn't work that way. Right? The rest of the market works, in fact, the opposite way. When sales fall, you have sort of surplus stuff around, prices fall and start to stimulate demand and all of that kind of stuff. So when General Motors has a lot of cars around because sales are pretty soft, prices drop. And conversely, when sales go up, prices go up. Well, this is one of the things that will change in the future. Right? In the future, it's really the sellers that will have this load forecast kind of risk. Right? In the future, people will make their bets, and if they're wrong and sales drop, prices will end up dropping, not going up. Very different kind of risk profile. Customers bore it in the past, generators will bear it in the future. It might be some other people who ended up buying the risk, but for the most part, generators. Fuel cost. Customers bore it in the past. It'll be a little bit of both in the future. Right? Because if fuel costs go up and, big and here, if fuel costs go up and market prices go up, customers will pay. If there's a causal connection between those two. But just to give you a little example here, because that didn't quite make sense even to me, and I said it, right, is what happens in this brave new competitive world if coal prices go up, but gas prices don't? If gas is on the margin, if gas was dictating market price, coal price increases don't result in increases in market prices. It results in losses to the people who happen to have coal. All right? If gas prices go up and market prices go up, what happens to the guy who had the coal plant? Their cost didn't go up if only gas went up. But market prices went up, their profits go up. It's going to be a very different risk profile than we had in the past. What about the risk of bypass, customers leaving, customers putting in their own source of generation? Again, very different sort of risk profile. Stranded costs, both, they don't change, but new stranded cost. And I probably should have put that here. In the future, if something comes along again that sort of fits in that stranded cost category, something that says, somebody went out and built a plant expecting that market prices were going to be 4 cents, and lo and behold, they turned out to be 2 cents. Please make it up, they say. That's what utilities are saying today. In the future, that wouldn't happen, we hope, unless there's, the old sort of bailout kinds of things. Market prices, again, that's part of that same fuel cost kind of scenario. Now, I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff to try to, I'm not going to skip this though. I'm going to use this for a different purpose than I first was. I'm going to use this to really try to impress upon you the fact that the details matter, right? The how you do this stuff really matters. And here my example is going to be load management. Right? We all know what load management is. It's like demand side management activity. It's controlling load, not necessarily saving kilowatt hours. It's cycling air conditioners. It's, I guess Detroit Edison has a big thing with water heaters, don't you? Controlled water heaters? Yeah. And air conditioners. That's all load management kind of stuff. Well, what happens to load management in this brave new world? And again, I'm going to use this for a couple of purposes, but mostly to show you that, you know, the decisions about how you restructure will dictate what happens to load management. Because those load management kind of activities in the future may disappear or they may flourish. And they won't disappear or flourish simply because you've done radical restructuring. They'll disappear or flourish depending on whether you've done it well or poorly. All right, so first, the first sort of condition, the first sort of option that's up there is market rules. All right, well, how will these market rules sort of be created? Will demand management, will load management opportunities, will vendors who will control your water heater be allowed to be bidders, be allowed to be players in this market? Or will the market rules be written in a way that says you can't? You can only play in this game if you've got a generating plant. Well, having a generating plant that can quickly come on and give us a kilowatt is exactly the same as having a controlled water heater that can quickly turn or drop a kilowatt of demand. All right, but will the rules be written in a way that allow competition from load management kinds of activities right along with generators? If it does, load management has at least an opportunity to do something. If it doesn't, it won't. Have you done it well? Have you done it poorly? All right, the choice is really yours. Next, in an important one, a part of market rules up there, this is a hard concept to get across, but there's an issue as to whether or not capacity or reliability is going to be market-based or somehow dictated by rules that regulators create. Now, what that means is there's two ways to sort of go about making sure we have reliability, and here I mean reliability in the sense of enough generating capacity, not transmission lines, not distribution lines, but are there enough power plants to keep the lights on? One way to do it, the way we've historically done it, is somebody out there says, we need a reserve requirement. Right? We need generating capacity X% in excess of demand. In this region, it tends to be somewhere around 15 to 20%. And that's the way it used to be done. It was somebody, whether it's regulators or somebody else, somebody says, you have to have excess capacity around. And that's a rule that we're going to impose. That's one way to do it. And a lot of the places that are looking at deregulation in the U.S. are looking at it exactly that way. Now, the somebody changes. It's probably not regulators so much as the ISO, the Independent System Operator, or the Power Exchange, or something of that nature. All right, somebody ends up saying, you, whoever it is that's out there as a generator, has to have X% over and above your demand. That's the old way. Now, the new way, and the way some people in this country are talking about doing it, and the way they do it in a number of other countries, there's no requirement to have excess capacity. They simply price it. Now, I'll use the UK as my example because they've been up and running for longer than anyone else under this system. They put a price tag. Remember that you had that one part of the video was closed due to outage or something on that one business? Well, they had a bunch of smart people go out there or not so smart people, and they put a price tag on the value of a kilowatt hour that didn't get served, right? The value of an outage. And they value it at 2.5 pounds a kilowatt hour. Right? That's, I think, just under $4 a kilowatt hour. That's what they said. We think electricity reliability is very dear to us, right? That's $4 a kilowatt hour. That's pretty dear, right? People here are paying, what, 5, 6, 7, 8 cents. This is $4 a kilowatt hour. So they said reliability is very dear. It's worth a lot to us, but it's not worth an infinite amount. We are prepared to suffer an outage if to avoid an outage would cost us more than $4 a kilowatt hour. Right? They put that right into their system, and then they let her rip. And what that means is prices, that consumers pay, which vary from hour to hour in the UK, are priced on reliability as well as simply energy. What it means is any time of the day that it looks like we're getting tight on capacity, any time of the day that the chances of an outage, of there not being enough generation is high, prices start to go up. Prices in the United Kingdom have been over $3 a kilowatt hour. Right? Can you imagine paying $3 a kilowatt hour?
But their houses and buildings are wired so that they segregate some load that's expendable versus that which they have to have.
They've never shed load.
So they can.
They've never done it. They've never done it. Let me tell you what happens. This is important for load management kind of purposes. Prices in the United Kingdom are very, very volatile. Right? They range from from zero. There are hours when the price of electricity is zero, when they've got too many nuclear plants online relative to demand, and they got to do something. So price essentially drops to zero, and as high as I think $3.50 a kilowatt hour. And you can download from the internet the sort of daily sort of prices that change hour to hour. Very volatile prices because they haven't set that requirement to have reserve capacity. Now, if they set the requirement to have reserve capacity like we do now, then prices are still volatile relative to today, but not in that range. Right? Price volatility, absent that kind of provision, are down in the 0 to 5, 6, 7, 8 cents a kilowatt hour. Maybe if you got to crank up a diesel on only half of its cylinders, it'll be up to 10 or 12 cents a kilowatt hour. But the price volatility in the U.S. would be very low, right? Because you haven't priced capacity. What you've done is dictated the level of capacity, require people to try to roll that cost in. What does that mean for load management? It means a lot for load management, right? Because what you've seen now in the UK is load management just has taken off, right? Because when prices start to go up, $1, $2 a kilowatt hour, some of the cheapest things you can do is start to control load. You can start to control load, and that's what's happened in the UK. In the UK, they've had a very large increase in the amount of load management because people with the ability to do so have started to respond to those kinds of prices. We haven't decided yet in the U.S. You certainly haven't decided in Michigan. You haven't even talked about it in Michigan, about what kind of a system are we going to go to for market rules. What you do will dictate sort of what happens to this kind of option. I'm going to keep plugging away with load management. I'm going to skip a lot of the other ones, and we could get onto our happy hour, whatever we call it. The metering requirements. Right? I didn't see anything in the Michigan order about metering requirements. What kind of meters are you going to have in this brave new world? Well, in this brave new world, everything is not everything, but most things are on the spot market. Prices change from hour to hour. What kind of meters do you have to be able to do that? You have to have real-time meters. You don't have real-time meters out there. They just aren't there. And they aren't really, for small customers, cost-effective. All right, so what have people done instead? Well, what people have done instead is they said, aha, I don't have real-time meters, but I want to sort of play this deregulation game. And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to impute a certain load profile for different types of customers. Right, so I'm going to take Lisa, my regular old residential customer. I'm going to read her kilowatt hour meter every month. I'm going to see that she's your average 500 kilowatt hour per use customer. And I have for myself by rule a load shape that I impute to Lisa. That just has all my hours, 1 to 24, my load every hour, so that all of my load under here is her 500 kilowatt hours. Right? So without metering her on an hourly basis, I'm still going to impute to her hourly loads, which I'll use for all this pricing stuff. Right? Works great, except none of that load management stuff works. And you've just taken away, right, without having a meter on her that gives her her hourly prices. We're going to just impute some hourly loads for her. We've just taken away all of her incentive and all the incentive of any seller to do any load management for Lisa. It's just absolutely gone, because what happens if I now if I have a controlled water heater on her or not? Doesn't matter, because this is my agreed upon load shape. It's the one and only load shape I'm going to use for residential customers, and all I'm going to do is plug in her 500 or 600 or 700 kilowatt hours, and no matter what I do for load management will have no impact on her prices. That's bad for load management. How can you fix it? You can put in the other kind of meter. What if I don't want to spend the money? You can have a rule. You can change the market rules. You can change the market rules so that residential customers with load control get one load shape, and residential customers, right, if this is our standard customer, residential customers with the controlled water heater just got that peak clipped off, and that's now worth something to somebody. And you now sort of might have an opportunity for load management to take off in that kind of a market. Now, that's sort of boring technical stuff at some level. Lisa, you want to know about your bill?
Well, actually, it was, I was spoken, but that really hurts people like, say, my grandmother, who are very, the Depression era folks who are very cautious about what they use, right? Should it be more greedy customers? Am I off track?
Does it hurt thrifty customers and reward greedy customers? I don't know if I'd go quite.
Related to what you were saying, but that sort of makes sense.
I wouldn't go quite as far as you did, but what it does is it takes away all of the potential benefit from the customer, or from it takes away the incentive to do that stuff. So if your mother does it, she's doing it out of the goodness of her heart, not because she's saving any money.
Well,
And that's a mistake. If she uses less kilowatt hours, that's why I was focusing on load management. Most load management kinds of things don't affect your kilowatt hour use. It just puts it off into a different time. All right, so I'm assuming that controlling the water heater doesn't change her monthly kilowatt hour meter. All it does is take it from the peak and moves it someplace else. And for the most part, those are good things to do. Can you design a competitive market that sort of allows those kinds of things to happen? Sure, you can. And that's just one of 100 examples of you can do it right, you can do it wrong. You have to have more than time of day meters.
But I mean, that piece, during that acute peak, you're going to be paying higher price, and during the off-peak times, a lower price, and there is incentive therefore to do those things. And it is measured at the time it's indicated in the curve.
All right, time of use will give some ability to deal with that kind of stuff. But
But I want to be an Edison customer, but the average marketer. All right. Sorry, folks. But if some marketer calls up and says, we're going to save this amount of money, why? Not if they're already good.
well, I mean, that will certainly be a lure. And some of this stuff will be obvious to consumers, and other pieces won't. And a lot of the hard work is going to have to won't be readily apparent to consumers.
How would
They
you
could.
know that you get all of the proposed benefits?
You would. How would you know if you? I'll try to repeat the questions. How would you know if you get all of the the supposed benefits? What I'll tell you what the market economist would say. Okay. Well, how would what the market economist would tell the consumer is there'll be lots of people vying for that business of yours, and one of the people some of the people who will be vying for that business will say, "Aha, I'll give you, Detroit Edison's offering you 4 cents a kilowatt hour. I'll give it to you for 3 cents a kilowatt hour, but you have to agree to allow me to control your water heater. Right? And then what happens now is if I control your water heater, I'm going to reduce my cost. I'm now a seller, right? I'm not a generator. I'm one of these middlemen, out-of-state, fly-by-night middlemen. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out there and buy power to meet your needs and turn around and sell it to you.
Yeah, you're driving around the car with a cellular phone, that's your office.
Actually, I actually don't have a cellular phone. But it's. I mean, to be serious about all of this. I mean, it's sort of fun to make fun of the guys driving around with the cellular phones. But there are. I mean, as hard as this is going to be to believe, there are legitimate, reliable providers of power that aren't your local friendly utility. Right? There are other people. I know it's hard to believe. I know it's hard to believe, but there may not be other people who can actually operate the power plants. But in terms of who it is that's sort of providing you that final connection, there are other people that are out there. Yeah. And some of them are out of state. Who's going to take care of what? Who's going to take care of the lines when they go down? Well, I'll tell you what the sort of ordinary model is that people think of. Is that the thing we used to think of as your local friendly utility, the Detroit Edisons of the world, the Consumer Powers of the world, that those are the people who sort of own and operate and maintain the wires. Enron has nothing to do with the wires. And Enron doesn't have trucks. They don't run around out there and put them back up when they fall down. So that the wires business, transmission and distribution, continue to be a regulated monopoly that looks very similar to what it's been historically. Now, and this also came up this morning. Now, let me make one observation about it. Right now these utilities are vertically integrated, right? They're on all sides of the business. They're generating, non-generating. And the pressures, the financial pressures that I talked about are affecting every part of the business. It doesn't matter where I save $1. It may be that I'm really hurting on the generating side, but if I can save $1 on the distribution side by not trimming a tree or doing whatever, that's every bit as good as any other dollar saved. So right now, as we're in this sort of never land, you're seeing the monopoly wires business, which will continue to be a monopoly wires business, under enormous cost pressure, resulting in the kinds of things that you've seen out there. I suspect, and you do see this in the United Kingdom now, if you get through all this radical deregulation kind of stuff, and in particular, if the wires company is not in the generating business, is not in the power selling business, so they're not, trying to look out for the people that they're selling power to, right? All they're in is the wires business, and big and now, they're regulated in a way to produce the desired results. Right? If one of the things you care about is we want outages restored on average within 2 hours, and we don't want more than X number of customers out over the course of a year, for you set standards for that and incorporate those standards as an integral part of the way they're regulated. Then I think that the wires part of the business, the boom trucks, the storm restoration, will actually get better than it is now. But to do that, I believe requires a number of things. One, you got to get through the transition, because the transition's killing that part of the business. And second, you got to really separate the wires business, the transmission distribution business, from that lousy, no good competitive business where all the pressure is really coming from. And that, I think, is important for a lot of other reasons. But if I were an employee of a wires company, and all I cared about were my own small interest as an employee of a wires company, and didn't care about the market structure, market power kinds of concerns, I'd want to be an employee of a company that was a distribution system only. I wouldn't. I mean, it's sort of easy to sort of think about this. If you're an employee of a company that's in the wires business and they also happen to be in gold mining in Brazil, that's the two things that they do. And lo and behold, gold prices aren't doing so hot this year. To keep earnings up, you're going to squeeze this firm wherever you can, and it's going to end up being squeezed back on the distribution business. I think that from that employee sort of perspective, and for that matter, if what I really care about is customer reliability and those kinds of things, and I want to recognize the value that those things have, I'd separate those businesses and not allow them to be together. Now, some countries have done that better than others. We're doing a miserable job on that in the United States. I'll be very blunt with you. The proposals so far in Michigan are dismal in this respect. Oddly enough, I think the country that's done it the best is Argentina. They have created a wires company, and they've said, you can't be in the generating business. Period. End of discussion. Even though the wires company keeps saying, please, 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 let me be back in the generating business, they've steadfastly said no. The United Kingdom is slipping back into the old problem again. But, I mean, that I hope sort of answers your wires business. Harry?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to add something to what's happening in Great Britain. Is the 13 regional electric companies, 11 of them have been acquired, mostly by Americans.
8 out of 13.
And so what's happening, that's right, so 11 are gone. And what's happening, which makes matters worse, is the little child was the electric utility regulatory czar. His problem really was they had only 2 generators privately and then the group. And he had to impose price caps because the generators were charging the simply monopolistic rate. The sleeper in this, though, is that people who buy up the regional electric systems will therefore, by definition, control the grid because it's those 13 electric networks that, in a sense, hold the grid. So what you're getting is a bilateral oligopoly with essentially the 2 generators and 1 wholesale group in a standoff with the highly concentrated regional electric companies. And I think that's why, for example, Blair has said the only way to control your excess profits is to impose an excess profits.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these strategies, I might add another thing on Argentina. A good friend of mine was involved with the Argentinian gas situation, where they kept the gas pipeline network and distribution common carrier. But what they didn't point out was that Enron is a major player controlling production of gas. So they got them right on the trouble. And it was actually written into the statute, your hands off the gas producers. So here you have the producers of a very strong market and the regional the pipeline transmission and distribution. So there isn't. They can't do anything. So you still have this question linked to all of this. What they would say is fascinating about the pricing of retail electricity in Great Britain versus our predecessors that are putting in reserve markets. But what's happening, I see around the country, around the world, is this big play among large users who are repositioning. I agree with you, Dave. The way to do it, of course, is to separate transmission and distribution, making a true common carrier with that responsibility. But I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I think the whole thing about unbundling is now going to disappear because you can see it in the conference. There's a movement to rebundle. They want to be a single source supplier. And if you look at the Duke Power and Air thing, they want to be a single source supplier, one-stop shop. And so while we talk about unbundling, in reality, we want to rebundle.
Yeah, and
Why AT&T wants to give you a one-bundle package. I mean,
all of that says is There are more ways to do this wrong than there are right, and probably every wrong way that you can imagine has been done. The other thing I'll sort of, we should also say, I don't know if you taught me this line, Harry, or someone else did, but the goal of every capitalist, right? We all sort of pride ourselves on our capitalistic system, but the goal of every capitalist is to be a monopolist. And you try real hard to be a monopolist. There's no capitalist out there that wants fair competition. They want unfair competition, tilted in their favor. You want every advantage you can possibly get, and everybody in this restructuring game is out there looking for an advantage for them. And they're all going to be, next stop is at the legislature in Michigan. And I can tell you just from sort of seeing where things are right now. The sort of snapshot in time that one gets when you fly in from Maine to Michigan is this is not a good time. This is not a good time or a good place to be if you want to sort of think about doing this restructuring right. I think I may have mentioned to Harry when I was out there, for all of you who put up your hands as shareholders. I think right now the odds of shareholders coming out of this very well are very high. And the chances of labor interests, consumer interests, environment, energy efficiency coming out of this okay are very low. So this is not a bad time to buy consumers' power and sell low-income consumers and labor jobs if they were stock in such a thing. That's just like your snapshot in time. So that's why I'm just thrilled that you guys are like involved in all of this and trying to get up to speed. Now, I'm going to just say like 2 or 3 more things, and then let's try to spend the last. I'm going to say 1 or 2 more things, and then we're going to go have a drink. There are fixes to these things. The principles that ended up at the end of that video were good principles. You should demand that any restructuring plan have protection in it for universal service, for environmental improvement, for development of renewable, diverse resources, for worker safety, for worker protection of economic and safety. All of those things should be there and can be there. And the only way I think you're really going to get them is really through the kind of effort you're engaged in now and the kind of coalition building that I'm sure that you're involved in. So with that, I'm not even going to put up the next 35 slides. What else can I tell you about? Thank you for stopping, guys.